The fog is lifting. Clarity is calling you forward. Welcome to Forward in Freedom. I'm Tanya Johnson. This is where awareness becomes power. Let's move forward in freedom.
One of the strangest parts of growth is realizing that things you once enjoyed no longer affect you the same way. The conversations haven't changed. The environments haven't changed. The routines haven't changed. Yet somehow the experience feels completely different. You leave certain interactions feeling drained. You walk away from certain environments feeling disconnected. You notice yourself tolerating less than you used to. And for a while, you may wonder, what happened? The answer may be simpler than you think. Growth changed what feels normal. You see, most people expect growth to change their goals. Few people expect growth to change their tolerance, but that's exactly what happens. Because growth doesn't only change where you're going, it changes what you're willing to normalize along the way. This is one of the clearest signs that growth is taking place. Growth changes your tolerance, not your kindness, not your compassion, not your patience, your tolerance. One day you find yourself sitting in a conversation that used to feel completely normal, and then suddenly you're exhausted. Not because the conversation changed, because your capacity for certain things changed. What once felt acceptable now feels unhealthy. What once felt harmless now feels costly. That's when people often realize that growth isn't just changing what they pursue, it's changing what they can no longer comfortably participate in. You begin noticing negativity more quickly, gossip more clearly, unhealthy dynamics more easily, emotional immaturity more consistently, one-sided relationships more honestly. Not that you become critical, because you become aware. And awareness changes experience. Growth changes what you're willing to normalize. I can recall a friend that once shared a perspective that I think a lot of people will recognize. She said, I kept trying to make myself enjoy it again. You know, the group, the environment, the relationship, the job, the routine, the version of life that used to fit. She kept telling herself, maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe something is wrong with me. But nothing was wrong. Growth had quietly changed what nourished her. And that's where a lot of people get stuck. Because they assume that if something feels different, they must be the problem. But sometimes the problem isn't you. Sometimes growth has simply revealed the difference between familiarity and fulfillment. Just because something has been part of your life for years doesn't automatically mean it still supports where you're headed. That's difficult for people to accept because history creates attachment. Routines creates attachment. Comfort creates attachment. But attachment and alignment are not the same thing. Maybe the simplest way to say it is this. Just because something is familiar doesn't mean it is still feeding your growth. One of the biggest mistakes people make during growth is leaving too quickly. And one of the biggest mistakes people make during growth is staying too long. Both can be costly. Because not every uncomfortable environment is one you've outgrown. Some environments challenge you. Some environments strengthen you. Some environments expose areas that still need healing. Those environments are worth staying in. The key is learning the difference between a place that stretches you and a place that requires you to shrink. A stretching environment challenges you to become more. A shrinking environment presses you to become less. One develops you, the other depletes you. One calls you forward, the other one keeps you confined. And learning that distinction can save years of frustration. Believe me, I know. A stretching environment develops you, a shrinking environment diminishes you. If you've been listening and you're recognizing environments and relationships or conversations that feel different than they once did, those are exactly the kinds of growth conversations that we explore through Clear Direction Coaching. I've watched individuals gain tremendous clarity simply by understanding what season they're actually in. Sometimes the breakthrough isn't changing the environment, it's understanding why it affects you differently now. If you're ready for greater clarity in your own journey, you can schedule a complimentary discovery call through cleardirectioncoaching.com. And if relationship dynamics are part of your growth journey, the Gathering Alliance Relationship Assessment can help you identify certain strengths and patterns and challenges and opportunities for healthier connections. Sometimes people recognize they're outgrowing something long before they leave it. Why? Because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. Because known discomfort often feels less intimidating than an unknown possibility. Because staying feels predictable, and growth rarely feels predictable. Growth asks for courage, the courage to acknowledge what no longer aligns, the courage to stop pretending you're thriving when you're merely existing, the courage to stop shrinking yourself to maintain comfort. And that kind of honesty isn't always easy, but it's often necessary. Growth often requires leaving certainty before you can see what's next. Every environment costs something. The longer you stay where you no longer align, the higher the price becomes. At first, the cost may seem small. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. You adjust, you compromise, you make accommodations. But over time, those small adjustments become a way of life. You begin filtering yourself, editing yourself, suppressing yourself, adjusting yourself. And little by little, you stop feeling like yourself. Because shrinking yourself to maintain comfort always comes at a cost. It costs authenticity, it costs confidence, it costs energy, it costs growth, and sooner or later, it costs peace. The longer you ignore misalignment, the more expensive it becomes. Because when growth changes what feels normal, it doesn't only change the way you see environments, it eventually changes the way you see yourself. And that's often where people feel the greatest tension. Because growth can make old versions of you feel unfamiliar too. The version that tolerated things you no longer tolerate. The version that stayed silent when you now speak up. The version that settled when you now seek alignment. The version that worked so hard to fit where you never truly belonged. And eventually you realize something profound. You don't miss who you were. You miss what felt familiar. There's a difference. Because growth isn't asking you to become someone else. It's helping you become more fully who God created you to be. You don't always miss who you were. Sometimes you miss what felt familiar. One final thought before we close. Just because you miss something doesn't mean you're meant to return to it. Sometimes people assume that missing an old environment means they should go back. Missing an old relationship means they made the wrong decision. Missing an old version of themselves means growth was a mistake. Not necessarily. Sometimes you're simply remembering what was familiar. But familiar and called are not always the same. There are seasons God allows us to outgrow, not because they were bad, not because they failed, but because they completed their purpose. And wisdom is knowing the difference between honoring a season and trying to live in it again. Because growth is not asking you to go backward, it's inviting you forward. Not everything you miss is meant to be revisited. Because before we wrap up, here's what I hope you'll carry with you this week. What have you been tolerating simply because it feels familiar? Where have you confused history with alignment? What are you continuing to carry that no longer fits who you're becoming? And what might become possible if you stop forcing yourself to fit places you've already outgrown? Because growth doesn't always announce itself through achievement. Sometimes it shows up in places that no longer fit the way they once did. Growth becomes visible when what once fit no longer does. I love to hear your thoughts. What is something that once felt completely normal in your life but feels very different today? What helped you to recognize the shift? Your story may help someone else recognize their own. Sometimes growth becomes visible long before people know what to do with it. If you've been recognizing signs of change but struggling to understand what they mean, this may be the right time for a deeper conversation. You can schedule a complimentary discovery call through www.cleardirectioncoaching.com. You also can explore the Gathering Alliance Relationship Assessment and my book, A Woman's Exodus Only by Grace. Links are available in the episode notes. Excited about next week? We're going to be stepping into a different kind of conversation. I'll be joining a longtime friend as we talk about what moving forward in freedom has actually looked like through real life experiences, lessons learned, resilience, healing, and growth. Not from a textbook, not from theory, but from life. I know this conversation is going to encourage a lot of people, and I'd love for you to join us. I'm Tanya J, and this is the work of walking forward in freedom. Until we meet again, move forward in freedom.